Imagine waking up in a quiet Victorian street, only to hear screaming from a nearby house. You rush in and find a human body reduced to ashes, but the chair, the floor, and even the walls remain untouched. There's no fire, no explanation, just smoke and terror. This was the reality for countless witnesses of one of history's most mysterious epidemics, spontaneous human combustion. What is spontaneous human combustion? Spontaneous human combustion, SHC, refers to the supposed phenomenon of a human body catching fire without any external ignition source. Victims were often found charred to death while their surroundings remained relatively intact, leading observers to suspect some supernatural or inexplicable cause. The idea of human bodies igniting spontaneously predates Victorian England. Early references appear in the 17th and 18th centuries, often recorded in medical journals, letters, and local chronicles. However, it was during the Victorian era, a period fascinated by science, mysticism, and moral morality, that SHC truly captured public imagination. Early historical accounts. Before the Victorian epidemic, sporadic cases of spontaneous combustion were reported across Europe. A few notable examples. Margaret O'Donnell, Ireland, 1725, she was found in her home reduced to ashes, with only her legs and feet left intact. Neighbors claimed they saw no fire in the hearth. Countess Cornelia Zangari Bandi, Italy, 1731, one of the first documented cases studied by scientists. Her body reportedly burned while her room remained untouched. These cases, often sensationalized in local newspapers or pamphlets, contributed to a growing curiosity and fear about the human body's supposed internal fire. The Victorian era, fear and fascination. The 19th century was a unique period in European history. Rapid industrialization, urbanization, and advances in medicine were transforming society. Yet, alongside scientific progress, superstitions and fascination with the macabre thrived. Victorians were obsessed with life, death, and the boundaries of science. Ghost stories, seances, and experiments on human anatomy were common topics of discussion in parlors and scientific societies alike. It was in this environment that reports of spontaneous human combustion surged, creating both public hysteria and scientific inquiry. First major Victorian cases. By the early 1800s, Victorian newspapers were reporting SHC with increasing frequency. Some shocking examples include Mary Reeser, 1835, London, found partially burned in her chair. Witnesses reported no external fire source. Countess Cornelia, rediscovered accounts in Britain often cited in medical journals as evidence of a mysterious internal fire. Victorians described victims as mostly middle-aged or elderly women, though men were not immune. Alcohol consumption, obesity, and isolation were frequently noted as contributing factors in these mysterious deaths. Eyewitness descriptions. Victorian newspapers thrived on vivid, sensational storytelling. Reports often included victims reduced to ashes, with only extremities like feet or hands remaining. Scorched furniture, yet the surrounding room untouched. Strange smells of burnt flesh lingering for days. The public's imagination ran wild. Was this divine punishment? A manifestation of sin? Or a terrifying natural phenomenon beyond comprehension? Medical and scientific attention. Doctors and scientists of the era struggled to explain SHC. Some early theories included 1. Internal fire. The human body might generate heat internally due to chemical imbalances, leading to spontaneous ignition. 2. Alcohol and fat. Excess fat and alcohol in the bloodstream were believed to create flammable conditions within the body. 3. External ignition ignored. Some skeptics suggested small sources of fire, like candles, fireplaces, or cigars, were responsible, but observers failed to notice them. Medical journals of the time documented cases meticulously, though skepticism remained. Some physicians warned against sensationalism, but others embraced the mystery, presenting it as a real scientific phenomenon. Social and cultural context. Victorian England was a society obsessed with morality, sin, and divine retribution. SHC often took on moralistic interpretations. For instance, women who smoked, drank, or were perceived as immoral were sometimes suspected of being prone to SHC. Alcoholism and gluttony were linked to sudden combustion, reinforcing societal prejudices. At the same time, SHC fascinated writers, who used it as a plot device in horror stories and Gothic literature. The boundary between science and superstition blurred, allowing the epidemic to gain both notoriety and mystery. The epidemic takes hold. By the 1830s and 1840s, spontaneous human combustion, SHC, was no longer an isolated curiosity, it had become a widely reported epidemic across Victorian Europe. Newspapers and medical journals carried chilling accounts almost weekly. Entire neighborhoods discussed the phenomenon, and the public grew increasingly fearful. The epidemic primarily affected England, France, and Germany, though cases were reported elsewhere in Europe. Victims were often elderly or reclusive, but younger individuals were not immune. What made SHC terrifying was its suddenness and inexplicability. One moment, a person was alive and seemingly healthy; the next, they were reduced to ashes in a room untouched by flames. Famous Victorian cases. Several cases captured the public imagination and remain some of the most cited in SHC history. 1. Countess Cornelia Zangari Bandy, rediscovered accounts, 19th century. Though originally reported in Italy, Victorian journalists revisited her case to illustrate the mysterious nature of SHC. Her body reportedly burned almost entirely, leaving only a few extremities intact, with no external fire source. 2. Mary Reeser, London, 1835. Mary was found in her armchair, almost entirely incinerated. Eyewitnesses noted the nearby furniture and floor were barely scorched. Investigators speculated on internal ignition due to alcohol or excessive body fat, but no definitive explanation emerged. 3. Mrs. Jane Hill, Manchester, 1845. A widow in her 70s, Mrs. Hill was discovered in her kitchen, reduced to ashes except for her lower legs. Neighbors claimed they smelled smoke for hours before discovering her body. The coroner admitted he could not explain the phenomenon. 4. Mysterious French cases. In France, cases were reported across rural villages. In one account, a man was found burned in his bed while the room around him was untouched. Witnesses described a scent of burnt flesh lingering for days, adding a supernatural dimension to the reports. Eyewitness accounts and public reaction. Victorians were captivated by these stories, but also terrified. Eyewitness accounts often shared the same recurring details. Victims burned to ashes while furniture and walls remained unscathed. Smoke lingering for hours, sometimes causing panic among neighbors. Sudden and inexplicable deaths, often in isolated homes or cottages. Newspapers sensationalized these stories, with headlines designed to shock and terrify. Some writers even linked SHC to divine punishment, moral failings, or supernatural forces. Public reaction was a mix of fear, fascination, and moralizing judgment. Many people believed that sinful behavior, drinking, gluttony, or immoral living, could trigger combustion. Others feared that anyone could spontaneously ignite, making every elderly or solitary neighbor a potential victim. Theories explaining the epidemic. Scientists and doctors of the era attempted to explain the sudden surge in SHC cases, producing several theories. 1. The wick effect. Some suggested that body fat could act as a wick, sustaining combustion once ignited. For instance, a small external flame from a candle or fireplace might ignite clothing, which then allowed body fat to fuel the fire internally. 2. Alcohol consumption. Alcohol was frequently cited as a contributing factor. Many victims were reported to drink heavily, and doctors theorized that alcohol might somehow make the body more flammable. 3. Obesity. Excess body fat was thought to create internal conditions conducive to combustion. Victorian doctors linked overweight individuals disproportionately to SHC cases. 4. Supernatural forces. Despite growing scientific knowledge, many Victorians still attributed SHC to divine wrath or evil spirits, especially in isolated rural communities. Newspapers and sensational reporting. Victorian newspapers played a crucial role in spreading panic about SHC. Articles often exaggerated the details. Descriptions of bodies reduced to cinders. Emphasis on isolated homes and victims living alone. A speculation about supernatural or moral causes. The sensational reporting fueled public fear and fascination simultaneously. People debated endlessly in parlors, coffeehouses, and on the streets. Some even installed extra safety measures at home, such as keeping multiple buckets of water near chairs or beds. Patterns and statistics. Though the phenomenon was alarming, it followed certain patterns. Victims were mostly elderly women, often living alone. Alcohol use and obesity were common factors. Fires tended to consume the body entirely while leaving the surroundings mostly intact. These patterns intrigued scientists and sparked debates in medical societies. Despite meticulous documentation, no universally accepted explanation emerged, leaving SHC as one of the most mysterious Victorian epidemics. Social and cultural impact. The epidemic influenced literature, art, and public perception. Writers like Charles Dickens and Edgar Allan Poe drew inspiration from SHC for ghost stories and horror fiction. Artists depicted scenes of inexplicable combustion in drawings and prints, emphasizing the eerie and supernatural. The fear of SHC spread to other parts of Europe, influencing superstitions and moralistic interpretations of death. Victorian society grappled with the intersection of science, superstition, and morality, making SHC both a medical mystery and a cultural phenomenon. Early medical interest. As the epidemic of spontaneous human combustion, SHC, spread through Victorian Europe, doctors and scientists began taking it seriously. Previously dismissed as folklore or divine punishment, the sudden rise in cases demanded investigation. Medical journals of the time, such as the Lancet and British Medical Journal, published detailed accounts of SHC victims. Physicians meticulously recorded the victim's age, gender, and health, evidence of alcohol consumption or obesity, surrounding environment and potential external ignition sources. Despite careful observation, no conclusive cause was ever found. This lack of explanation only fueled the mystery. Theories of combustion. Victorian scientists proposed a variety of theories, attempting to reconcile SHC with emerging principles of chemistry, physiology, and physics. 1. Internal heat theory. Some believed the human body could generate heat internally, possibly due to chemical imbalances, fever, or a combination of fat and alcohol. Proponents argued that in rare cases, the body might reach ignition temperature spontaneously. 2. Alcohol as a catalyst. Alcohol consumption was often cited in cases of SHC. Some physicians suggested that ethanol in the blood could act as a flammable agent. Combined with fatty tissue, alcohol could theoretically ignite under certain conditions. 3. Obesity and fat combustion. Victims were frequently overweight, leading to the idea that body fat acted as fuel. Clothing or surroundings might serve as a wick, allowing slow, internal combustion. Modern experiments suggest this could explain some historical cases. 4. Ignition via cigar or candle. Skeptical doctors argued that minor external sparks, candles, lamps, or smoldering pipes, could ignite highly flammable clothing or bedding. However, many cases lacked any plausible source of external fire. 5. Nervous system or spiritual causes. In a society still fascinated by mysticism, some physicians suggested that SHC might be linked to nervous system disorders, emotional stress, or even spiritual energy. While these ideas were unscientific, they reflected the era's blend of science and superstition. Investigations and experiments. Victorian scientists tried to replicate spontaneous combustion under controlled conditions. They conducted experiments involving heating fatty tissue to simulate ignition, applying alcohol to mannequins or animal cadavers, testing different fabrics and environmental conditions. Some experiments supported the wick effect, where body fat could fuel a slow, intense fire, leaving surroundings relatively unscathed. However, replication was inconsistent, and many cases remained unexplained. Medical societies debated vigorously: was SHC a real medical phenomenon or simply misinterpreted accidents? Skepticism and criticism. Not all scientists accepted SHC as genuine. Critics pointed to incomplete evidence in historical cases, poor observation methods, the likelihood of overlooked external fire sources. Some argued that victims might have fallen asleep near open flames or had clothing catch fire accidentally. Others suggested exaggeration by newspapers eager to sell sensational stories. Despite skepticism, the epidemic continued, with new cases reported across Europe, compelling even doubters to acknowledge the phenomenon's mysterious patterns. Notable Victorian medical reports. 1. Dr. Henry Abraham, London, 1848. Documented multiple SHC cases, noting the peculiar absence of damage to surroundings and the complete destruction of bodies. He argued for a combination of alcohol, obesity, and slow internal combustion. 2. Dr. Lionel Bevan, Paris, 1852. Examined French cases and concluded that some form of chemical reaction inside the body could produce intense heat. He admitted this was speculative but insisted on its plausibility. 3. Medical Society debates, 1850s. Scientific journals published debates between supporters of supernatural explanations and advocates of chemical or physiological causes. These discussions highlighted the Victorian struggle to merge superstition with emerging scientific rigor. The role of alcohol and diet. Victorians placed significant emphasis on lifestyle factors. Alcohol consumption, heavy drinking was believed to make individuals prone to SHC. Some physicians suggested that alcohol altered metabolism or ignited in combination with fat. Diet and obesity, excess body fat was frequently cited as a combustible source. Smoking, Victorians speculated that habitual smoking or proximity to lamps could contribute to ignition. While these factors may explain some cases, they could not account for the complete destruction reported in many instances, leaving SHC a tantalizing mystery. Modern scientific perspective. Modern researchers have revisited historical SHC cases with contemporary science. The wick effect theory suggests that clothing acts as a wick while body fat serves as fuel, explaining how bodies can burn almost completely without igniting surroundings. Accidental fires, many cases likely involved small ignition sources that went unnoticed, combined with flammable clothing or poor ventilation. Psychological and observational bias, eyewitnesses often exaggerated events due to fear or sensational reporting. While SHC is no longer considered a supernatural phenomenon, it remains a subject of fascination due to its bizarre and dramatic historical accounts. Influence on Victorian society. The epidemic had significant cultural and societal effects. Public fear. People feared that SHC could strike anyone, particularly the elderly, isolated, or heavy drinkers. Literature and art. SHC inspired horror stories, prints, and paintings depicting charred bodies and mysterious flames. Scientific curiosity. The phenomenon pushed Victorian medicine to explore combustion, human physiology, and forensic science, even if conclusions were often inconclusive. Victorians were caught between rationalism and superstition, reflecting the tension of an era on the cusp of modern science. The decline of the epidemic. By the late 19th century, reports of spontaneous human combustion, SHC, had significantly declined. Improved household safety, widespread adoption of safer stoves and lamps, and more rigorous fire prevention measures likely contributed to the decrease in cases. Victorian society, once gripped by fear of sudden, fiery death, began to view SHC with increasing skepticism. Many medical professionals argued that cases were the result of accidents or exaggeration, rather than a true internal combustion phenomenon. Lasting cultural impact. Even as the epidemic faded, SHC left a permanent mark on Victorian culture. Literature, writers like Charles Dickens, Edgar Allan Poe, and Wilkie Collins drew inspiration from SHC for horror stories and Gothic fiction. Scenes depicting mysterious fires, charred bodies, and unexplainable deaths were common. Art and illustration. Victorian artists created detailed engravings and illustrations of SHC cases, often dramatizing the phenomenon for public fascination. These prints were widely circulated in newspapers and journals, further fueling the legend. Public morality. SHC was sometimes framed as divine punishment for immoral behavior, reinforcing societal norms around temperance, chastity, and propriety. The phenomenon also shaped forensic medicine, encouraging doctors to document unusual deaths systematically and consider unusual causes for fire-related fatalities. Modern investigations. In the 20th and 21st centuries, researchers revisited historical SHC cases with modern science. 1. The wick effect. Studies show that human fat can act as a fuel source while clothing functions as a wick. This explains why bodies can be almost completely incinerated while surrounding furniture remains mostly intact. 2. Accidental ignition. Many historical cases likely involved small external sources such as candles, lamps, or cigars. Combined with flammable clothing and alcohol consumption, these minor sparks could cause catastrophic burning without igniting the entire room. 3. Psychological and observational bias. Eyewitnesses often exaggerated or misinterpreted events due to fear or shock. A newspaper sensationalism amplified the horror, making SHC seem more mysterious than it was. While modern science largely explains SHC without invoking supernatural causes, the historical accounts remain compelling for their mystery, drama, and cultural significance. SHC in popular culture. The legend of SHC continues to intrigue people around the world. Books and documentaries. SHC remains a popular topic in paranormal books and television documentaries, exploring unexplained deaths and Victorian-era mysteries. Movies and TV shows. Scenes inspired by SHC appear in horror films and series, often emphasizing sudden combustion, charred bodies, and the fear of the unseen fire. Online communities. Paranormal enthusiasts and amateur investigators continue to discuss and analyze both historical and modern cases of SHC, keeping the legend alive in the digital age. The enduring fascination lies in the blend of mystery, science, and human fear, the same elements that terrified Victorians nearly 2 centuries ago. Lessons from the epidemic. The Victorian SHC epidemic offers several enduring lessons. 1. The limits of science in the 19th century. Victorian scientists struggled to reconcile superstition with emerging scientific knowledge. SHC exemplifies the era's tension between rationalism and mystery. 2. Cultural fear and moral panic. SHC fueled moral judgments, social fear, and sensationalism, showing how unexplained events can shape societal behavior. 3. Advances in forensic science. Documentation of SHC cases encouraged systematic observation, improving forensic investigation and medical reporting. 4. Human fascination with the unexplained. Even today, SHC captivates imaginations because it challenges our understanding of fire, death, and the human body. Modern perspective. Today, most scientists and historians agree that SHC is not truly spontaneous. Factors such as alcohol consumption, obesity, smoking or nearby ignition sources, flammable clothing, poor ventilation, combine to create tragic and mysterious accidents, which were then sensationalized by media and cultural narratives. However, the Victorian epidemic remains one of history's most gripping mysteries, blending elements of science, superstition, morality, and human fascination with death. Why we still remember SHC? The epidemic continues to resonate because it highlights human vulnerability and the fear of sudden, unexplained death, reflects the cultural anxieties of Victorian society, inspires stories in literature, film, and popular culture, demonstrates how humans seek to explain the unexplainable, balancing reason and imagination. Victorian Europe may have feared the invisible fire that could strike anyone, but their stories created a legacy of mystery and intrigue that survives today. The spontaneous combustion epidemic shocked an entire continent, leaving a trail of fear, fascination, and unanswered questions. Though science has largely explained these deaths as accidental, the mystery endures. Spontaneous human combustion reminds us that history is not just about what happened, but also about what people feared, imagined, and tried to understand. The Victorians may have feared the fire within, but their stories continue to ignite our imagination.